And viewers, yes, we are continuing our coverage, even though we said goodbye to our first Chief Secretary, Mr. Hochoy Charles, yesterday. We here at Tobago Updates are continuing our conversations at the Assembly Legislature building about Mr. Charles, because there's so much to be said. I mean, just a week of GMT is not enough to really cover. However, joining us first up this morning, we are being joined by Dr. Allison Williams, who is a former technical advisor in the THA. So good morning and welcome to you, Dr. Williams. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine. Enjoying life.
Now, I mean, of course, I'm not sure if you were at the funeral yesterday, that grand send-off to Mr. Charles. Yeah. And, after that funeral, what are your thoughts? What did you walk away with?
Well, it was difficult to see him go, first of all, because I worked very closely with him for close to 20 years. When I graduated as an engineer from the University of the West Indies, I was determined to come back to Tobago to help in Tobago's development. And I became an engineer in the Ministry of Works in 1979. But at that time, the advocacy for the establishment of the THA was in vogue. And the first elections for the THA were held in 1980. And when the DSC won the elections, there was a desire to reorganize Tobago's administration to accommodate what was now a new dispensation for Tobago's administration. And I remember vividly that we had to bring together what was the Ministry of Works, working under a minister originally, and the Tobago County Council, which operated as part of the Tobago County Council. There were sections in the council that dealt with roads and drainage, health and sanitation, sports, and so on. So the health and the infrastructure part of the council had to merge with the Ministry of Works. And I was a significant part of that because I just graduated, as I said, and had this desire to improve the infrastructure of Tobago. And it happened that the Secretary for Works, the first Secretary for Works was Mr. Hochoy Charles. I was not in charge of the Ministry of Works at that time. I was a junior engineer. But the engineers that were at the higher level were mainly from Trinidad. And when the assembly started to operate, I recall one of them saying that this space is too hot for me. I have to go back to Trinidad. And because of the movement of those engineers out of the system, my acceleration to higher levels was intense. So I became technical officer at the Division of Infrastructure in 1984. And I was the youngest person at that level in the government at that time. But I had met Charles before I became technical officer, and I used to give him a lot of ideas as an engineer that can be used to improve the systems that we were operating with. And he appreciated that. And when I became technical officer, then we started to work more intensely. We had some late nights, very intense days.
And what was it like? So what was he like in those days?
No, for me, I was excited about working with him because he was very receptive to the ideas that I had. And I could have worked with many of the ideas that he had. So we were synergistic in a sense. You know, whatever he suggested to me was very easy for me to implement because I knew what his objectives were. And when I make a recommendation to him to get his approval and consent to go forward, he readily accepted them, So we had a synergy that made things happen. And it was in the elections of 84, because the first election was in 1980. And then there was a second election 4 years hence in 84, where he won that election. There's where the people started calling him the heavy roller, because they saw that there was a kind of intense passion to get things done. So when they started calling him the heavy roller, I would think that if he was the heavy roller, I was the driver of the roller, right? So we made things happen across Tobago. And we work assiduously, we put many things in place to make things happen. I recall going to a meeting with him. I was very small. I recall going to a significant meeting with the Ministry of Finance one Saturday morning to justify our budget that we had for Tobago. And I sat in a meeting with him, and the budget people came up and they were talking and explaining what they need to know and so on. And I was very quiet in the meeting until he said, I will now ask Mr. Williams to make the presentation that he has. And everybody was really surprised, you know, that he was calling me Mr. Williams, because the pronouncement was that, hi, Mr. Charles, I thought that was your son or some relative that you brought to the meeting with you. So he really moved with me in anything that he had to do. And we worked together assiduously to bring things forward. We changed up the whole system in Tobago that we met in the early 80s, well, for me in 1979. And people were very proud of the roads that we had in Tobago at that time. You could hear when people come from Trinidad for holidays in Tobago that they would be very expressed about the level of development of the infrastructure in Tobago. And Hochoy and I led that charge to make those things happen.
What is something about that time that people may not necessarily know about Mr. Charles, but you know?
So Hochoy and I had the same problem with people. From a distance, they thought that you were unapproachable, you too aggressive, you too intense, you want them to do things that they don't think they should be doing. So I was a hard taskmaster as technical officer, and I gave people direct instructions about what we wanted to do, and I was very serious. I was a serious little guy, you know. So people were afraid to come to me. So much so, they were also afraid to go to Hochoy because of he had this stature that doesn't seem to be inviting. But when you meet the man, you understand that he's a different person from how you see him from a distance. Same thing people would have also told me. But you know, Mr. Williams, people say that you're bad and so on. But you know, coming to sit down and talk with you now, I realize that you're not as people are saying. And I think Hochoy had that much more intense than I had. And it stayed with him for his whole life. You know, I think that it intensified later on in his life why he was never able to successfully contest elections after 1996. Because when he lost in 2001, he never was able to make any serious ground. I mean, there were times when he may have lost his deposit for a man who everybody had liked so much a few years earlier, you know. But he was that kind of person that I think there was a little paradox about him, you know. The thing when you get to him and you are greeting him and you say, well, Mr. Charles, how are you? He will tell you humble and polite, and he looks at you over his glasses, you know, humble and polite. And he's waiting for you to now say, what are you here for? And by the time the conversation reaches 5 minutes, you realize that Hochoy Charles is a doll. He's a soft person. Not the gruffiness that you may hear from the voice that he possesses. And he would have scared some people off, perhaps. But I loved working with him. I enjoyed my entire life with him, producing goods and services for the people of Tobago.
What was your favorite part of those days? What stood out to you during that time?
I liked the fact that he was intense in his analysis and his editorial on things that he did to make sure that when it goes out as something that should not be rejected. I also enjoyed some of the stories that he would have told. As a matter of fact, one of them that sat with me forever was when I was experiencing people's ill comments about the things that I was engaged in. I would go and say to him, Mr. Charles, people are saying X, Y, and Z about me, and I don't understand why are they saying all these things. And he sat me down one day and he said, Allison, let me tell you something. Look at a mango tree. The mango tree has ripe mangoes and it has green mangoes. And in the mango tree, there are birds. All the birds are heading for the ripe mangoes. Pregnant woman passing by that mango tree, eyes on ripe mangoes. They will ask somebody who is passing along with them if they could pick this ripe mango on the tree for them. Schoolboys are passing and they have stones in their hands. They will be pelting at the ripe mango. You know why? Because the ripe mango has substance. So when you are being bombarded by comments from persons who are in the space, the environment, and they are leveling all kinds of criticisms and so on at you, don't worry about that. It is because you have substance why they are targeting you. And that stuck with me for my whole life, that I don't worry about little chats and little complaints that people may have. Not that I became insensitive to them, but I didn't make it affect me to the point where I become unable to do what I'm supposed to do and that kind of thing. So I enjoyed those kinds of stories he used to tell to pick you up and to motivate you and to prevent you from feeling downtrodden by what was emanating in the space that we operated in.
So after you stopped working with Mr. Charles and you moved on with your career, and of course Mr. Charles moved out of office and so on, what was your relationship like during those times?
Well, our relationship basically died. And the reason for that was the intensity of the comments in the space about my not doing anything for Tobago, Charles not doing anything for Tobago after he lost the elections, and the belief that I was a member of the political party and I had too many businesses and I was Charles' right-hand man, and therefore I didn't belong to what was the new dispensation that existed after 2001. So in order to keep my sanity, I chose not to associate too much with the politicians. So Mr. Charles and I had a freeze on the relationship that we had while we were working together, because I wanted to be able to survive in this environment without people labeling me as a politician. Now, many people thought I should have been a politician, but I came back to Tobago after graduating with a determination to be a technical person, an engineer, to help in the development. I used to tell all the politicians of that time, Dr. Jeff Davidson, Mr. Denoon, Charles himself, I said, when you go out on a platform and you make your pronouncements, I will be in my office putting things together to ensure that what you said on the platform comes to fruition. So I don't want to be one of you going on the platform and making pronouncements and I don't have anybody to support me when I go back to do what I have to do. So let me remain an engineer and you be the politician. And every election, I used to be bombarded with requests to be a candidate, whether it is for Bonaccord, Canaan, or Tobago West, whatever the elections were. I always used to be having those kinds of requests. But I never wanted to be a politician. And because of the closeness that Mr. Charles and I had as politician and technician to make things happen, people mistake that relationship for my being a politician as well. And I really didn't take too much to that kind of assessment of myself. So I said, you know what, the best thing would be for me to just keep a low profile. Actually, in 2001, one of the things that happened, apart from the Adder and the ring bang that Mr. Charles was heavily criticized for, and the narrative was out there that made it difficult for him to win another election. I and another colleague went to him, and we tried to convince him that he should stay back from going up for the elections because of the heavy criticisms that were being leveled at him and were being discussed by the people, and we could sense that he was going to lose the election. So we went to him and we suggested that he doesn't take part in election as a candidate. Let others do it, and when they win, they could pull you back in to do things as a counselor or whatever. So the long and short of all of that is that he looked at me, he said, Mr. Williams, what are you in this whole thing? I said, well, I'm an engineer. And he looked at my other colleague and asked him a similar question. And he said, well, I'm an economist. He said, well, let me tell both of you. And two of us are PhDs, huh? Let me tell both of you that where politics is concerned, I am the politician, not you. And we realized that he wasn't hearing what we were saying.
Yeah.
And the best thing to do when Mr. Charles makes up his mind is to leave him alone. Okay? So we walked out of his office disappointed that he didn't hear us, because as I told you, we work closely together. And he would hear what I have to say and I would hear what he has to say. But in this instance, he didn't understand what we were saying. And he went up for elections and lost the election, significantly too. Okay? And he didn't finish there because he had this so strong determination to achieve what appears to be unachievable. He is the kind of person that had a temerity and a strength to prove the marish and the parish wrong in whatever his thoughts were. And he went up for election after election after election and did not succeed. And it is, first of all, it is the strength of his determination while he is losing that he continued to go. So that is the strength of the man. But the reality was that he couldn't see that people had given up on him to be a part of the THA, even though he had the knowledge and the understanding and the structure and the narrative that will take you forward. Because one thing I enjoyed with him too, while we worked together, is that I would have ideas to make improvements in the organization, which was works on infrastructure at the time. And I would say to him, you know, Mr. Charles, I think if you and I go together to talk to the people, it would have more effect. And with that agreement, we started going around Tobago, speaking to every division, every section of the Division of Infrastructure and Transport. And we succeeded in getting people to understand the relationship between our level and their level and how they should communicate issues. and ideas to make things better and so on. Do not ever assume that because you hear somebody say something that it is a gospel truth. Let it move to the next level and get the real information that you should be getting. And the division really clicked during those times because of the communication that was available to the workers in the division to make things happen. We even brought on most outstanding persons at that time. The only thing that used to happen in those ministries were retirement party. So there was no recognition of what a public servant was doing during the tenure. It was that, okay, so your time has come for retirement, we'll hold a little party and send you away. That was the only thing that was happening then.
But now that Mr. Charles is gone and we saw at the funeral, you know, he was honored, given the Medal of Honor, which Mr. Augustine explained that he refused while he was alive and so on. But what do you think about, you know, just those things that were announced by Mr. Augustine as to how we should, or how we are going to be honoring him?
Well, I think there are significant ways that the Chief Secretary has announced to honor him. There may be others that can come along. There may be other entities that will do things. I am sure that something may happen in the Golden Lane community, where he was a significant player in community activities. I think they were good ideas that Mr. Augustine pronounced, and it would have been a good idea for him to have given the medal to his family, because Mr. Charles was never interested in any gifts from anyone for any purpose during my tenure with him. You know, there would be companies that will give Christmas gifts to those who they associated with during the year. Mr. Charles never received anything from anyone who brought to the division to give to him. You know, Mr. Charles was not interested in any parties himself, like Chief Secretary party at the Chief Secretary residence and all those things that others may have had. He never had those at all. Even when we had our outstanding awards to various employees in the division, in sections of the division, Mr. Charles did not attend those. He gave the okay for it to take place, but he himself never attended them. So he was not a person about giving or receiving things from people because they believed that he did something good for them and so on. He was really an outstanding person. He was a giant of a person, and I was happy to associate with him during my career, developing at the youngest stage of my life as an engineer with him, you know.
And well, that's how we're going to have to leave things this morning with you. I mean, such a wonderful way to encapsulate your service with him as a technical advisor under that time where he really embodied that whole heavy roller part of him.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams.
You're welcome.
And viewers, we got a whole lot more coming up for you on the program, so please don't go anywhere, because up next we are going to be joined by Dr. Alice Boris as we hear more about those who worked very closely with Mr. Charles.
It's a brand new morning, rise up to a brand new dawn.